Hey guys, tonight we're going to slip quietly into a world of candlelight and stone halls, where the air smells faintly of wood smoke and the shadows of flickering torches stretch long along cold castle walls. You're wrapped in a heavy wool cloak, the kind that's scratchy around the collar, but warm enough to fend off the chill seeping up from the flagstones. Somewhere in the courtyard, the clink of armor and the muted murmur of voices hint at preparations for a feast. And somewhere beyond the stables, a lute is being tuned. Not because someone's about to sing a song for your modern ears, but because tonight, in the court of some minor noble flirtation, will unfold like a chess game played with words, glances, and gestures so subtle you'd miss them if you blinked. Of course, you probably wouldn't survive long in this world. Let's be honest, you'd either freeze in winter, insult the wrong night, or be hopelessly confused by the social rules before the night was over. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you feel like it, post your location and your local time in the comments so I know where in the world you're tuning in from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself in the heart of medieval Europe, let's say sometime in the 14th century. It's not a fairy tale version with endless banquets and polite knights. It's the lived-in kind of world, where the rushes on the floor are damp from last night's spilled ale, and the tapestries on the wall do their best to block the draft, but mostly just make the stone look less bare. Flirtation here is not the casual, "Hey, how's it going?" you're used to. It's a slow burn, a calculated dance between propriety and suggestion. In an age where reputations can be shattered by a single indiscreet touch, most flirting never crosses into anything physical. A touch on the hand could be the boldest move of the evening, and even that might be done under the guise of passing a goblet or offering help over a threshold. The art lies in making your intentions known without making them so obvious that the wrong person notices, because the wrong person could be your rival, your chaperone, or worse, your potential beloved's father. Picture the feast hall as it fills. Wooden tables stretch the length of the room, set with trenchers of bread, salted meats, soft cheese, and pitchers of watered wine. The warmth from the central hearth is pleasant, but the smoke drifts unpredictably, sometimes making you squint and turn away mid-conversation. It's noisy laughter, the clang of cups, the occasional bark of a hound lurking hopefully under the table, but somehow you're aware of someone across the room. Perhaps they've glanced at you once, maybe twice, and the game begins. Your first move isn't to walk over. That would be absurd. No, you'll arrange to pass close by, perhaps to refill your cup or to speak to a mutual acquaintance. This gives you the perfect chance for what medieval lovers understood well: the passing glance. Held for just a heartbeat longer than polite, it says more than an entire poem recited aloud. That glance is currency, and you must spend it wisely. If you were of the noble class, flirting might be a more formal affair. The tradition of courtly love, popularized in poetry and song, meant that an exchange could be drenched in metaphor. A man might compare a lady's beauty to the first bloom of spring, while she parries with a remark about how even spring can be fleeting. Everyone in the room might hear the words, but only the two of you know the meaning tucked inside. It's a performance part, theater part, sincerity, and the more elegantly you play your role, the more your reputation grows. But if you're of humbler birth, the rules shift slightly. The market square, the church steps after Mass, the edge of the fields at harvest. These are your stages. Here, flirtation is still indirect, but less cloaked in verse and more in the language of practical compliments and shared labor. You might comment on the way someone carries 2 buckets of water with ease, or how their singing carries above the others during a festival. These words are safe enough to be brushed off if overheard, yet warm enough to linger in the mind of the one receiving them. The truth is, much of medieval flirting is about plausible deniability. You must be able to say, "Oh no, I meant nothing by it," if someone accuses you of impropriety and mean it convincingly. A dropped handkerchief, a sprig of rosemary tucked into a loaf of bread, a ribbon accidentally left behind after a dance, all these are ways of signaling without saying anything that could land you in real trouble. And of course, there's the music. Every feast, wedding, or fair worth remembering has its musicians, the lute players, the fiddlers, the singers who can spin a ballad long enough for you to stand in the shadows and listen together. If you're bold, you might request a particular tune, one whose lyrics carry a meaning your intended will understand. A love song about 2 separated by fate, perhaps nothing too obvious, but enough to make them wonder. Still, you must tread carefully. If the local gossip and every village has one decides your exchange is worth talking about, the story can spread faster than you can imagine. Sometimes this can work in your favor, making your interest public enough that it forces the other party to respond. Other times, it can close doors before they've even opened. The safest course is to let the game unfold slowly, savoring each small step. You can imagine now the glow of torchlight, the warmth of wine, the hum of voices. Across the table, a hand moves to adjust a cup, and for just an instant, fingertips brush. It's nothing, it has to be nothing, but in that instant, the world shifts a fraction. You both know it, and yet you both look away as though it didn't happen. This is what makes medieval flirting both frustrating and intoxicating. It's a series of maybes strung together like beads. Maybe they meant to look at me. Maybe they smiled. Maybe they lingered when they spoke my name. You collect these moments like tiny treasures, replaying them in your mind later when you're alone, wondering if you imagined the whole thing. If you're lucky, the evening ends with some small token, a folded scrap of parchment with a line of verse, a dried flower, a ribbon cut from the edge of a sleeve. To anyone else, it's meaningless. To you, it's everything proof that the game has begun and that tomorrow the dance will continue. And as the feast winds down, the hall grows quieter. People drift toward the door, pulling cloaks tight against the night air. Somewhere in the darkness beyond the castle walls, a dog howls and the sound echoes faintly across the fields. The stars wheel overhead in a sky unspoiled by city light, and you wonder if somewhere else in the castle the person who caught your glance is thinking of you too. But before you find out, you'll have to wait until tomorrow, because in the medieval world, nothing moves quickly when it comes to matters of the heart. And that's just the way people like it. Morning comes slowly in the medieval world. There's no alarm clock to jar you awake, only the gradual silvering of the room as dawn filters through narrow, unglassed windows. The air is cold enough that you hesitate before throwing back the covers, listening to the muffled sounds of life stirring elsewhere in the castle or village. Somewhere outside, a rooster calls not politely at sunrise, but whenever it pleases. You pull on your clothes layer by layer, linen shift, woolen tunic, perhaps a belt to gather the fabric in, and already your mind drifts back to last night. That one glance, that fleeting touch. The memory feels warmer than the blanket you've just left behind. You wonder if it meant what you think it did, or if you've invented the whole thing. This is the constant game, interpreting signals so faint they could vanish if you looked too directly at them. Flirtation in medieval times isn't confined to the feast hall. It spills into the rhythm of the day, into the moments between work and prayer, into errands and chores that become pretexts for passing near someone's path. You might volunteer to carry bread from the bakehouse to the kitchens, knowing it will take you through the courtyard at a time when they often pass through. Or you might linger at the well a little longer than necessary, turning over the bucket slowly, as though lost in thought. The most skilled flirts never make it obvious. They fold their intentions into acts so ordinary, no one would think to question them. It's a lesson in patience, not the kind that waits idly, but the kind that maneuvers quietly, arranging chance encounters, without ever seeming to arrange anything at all. In noble households, mornings are often busy with servants carrying trays, sweeping rushes, airing bedding. You might spot the one you're hoping to see only in passing, perhaps crossing a gallery, their head bent over a scrap of parchment, lips moving silently as they read. You catch yourself smiling, though you keep your face neutral if anyone else might notice. And if you're not of noble rank, the pattern is different, but the opportunities are still there. In a village, people's paths cross constantly at the mill, the blacksmith's forge, the churchyard. These are not glamorous places, but they are stages just the same. Even while bent over a task, the eye notices things, the way someone adjusts their cap, how they stand in sunlight, how they laugh at a friend's remark. One of the subtle arts is gift-giving, or rather gift-leaving. It's dangerous to give something openly unless you have a secure excuse, but you can arrange for something to be found. A small length of ribbon might appear on a workbench. A sprig of lavender might be tucked into the fold of a cloak. These are the breadcrumbs of affection, tiny enough to be dismissed as coincidence, but meaningful to the person who finds them. Of course, words still have their place, though not the frank declarations you might expect today. Flirting speech is often layered with double meanings. You might compliment someone on their skill at weaving or singing, but say it in a tone that lingers just a fraction too long on the word skill, making them wonder if you mean something more. You might remark on how well they carry themselves, ostensibly about posture, but with an undertone that suggests you notice them in ways others do not. There's also the ritual of borrowed objects. You might forget to return a knife you were lent at last week's fair, or they might keep the mug you used when you visited. Such items are small enough not to cause scandal, but they become little totems of connection, reasons to meet again under the pretext of returning them. And if poetry is your strength, even a single line scrawled on a scrap of parchment can carry more weight than a dozen spoken compliments. You could quote a line from a well-known romance, one that everyone would recognize as harmless on its own, but which gains private meaning when passed discreetly into someone's hand. The troubadours of the South perfected this, turning everyday phrases into codes of longing. But not every flirtation is a safe game. Sometimes the stakes are higher than you realize. Imagine that the one you've been exchanging glances with is already promised to another, or worse, is the subject of interest from someone with more power than you. In such cases, a flirtation can slide from pleasant diversion into dangerous entanglement faster than you'd expect. A wrongly interpreted word, a witnessed exchange, and suddenly whispers start. And whispers in a medieval court or village can carry the weight of proof. This is why much of the charm lies in the uncertainty. If you never declare yourself outright, no one can accuse you of overstepping, and yet the other person may still understand perfectly. You exist in a shared fog of implication, where everything is deniable but nothing is meaningless. Festivals provide one of the safest times for open flirting. The whole community gathers, music plays, and the usual boundaries loosen slightly. You can dance together in the open, pass cups, back and forth, laugh without it seeming suspicious. A hand placed lightly at the small of the back, as you guide someone into a circle, dance might be felt more strongly than a kiss in another setting. The glow of lanterns, the smell of roasting meat, the rhythm of drums, all these work together to make the heart more willing to imagine possibilities. Even so, there's a formality to these encounters that you must respect. To step beyond it too quickly is to risk seeming rude or even crude. Part of the pleasure is in stretching the anticipation as far as it will go. You both know the rules. You both know you're playing. The game is to see how much meaning you can exchange without ever breaking the illusion of propriety. In the quiet after the festival, when you've returned to your own bed, whether it's a straw-stuffed mattress in a peasant's loft or a feather bed in a noble's chamber, you lie awake replaying the evening. The brush of fingers, the shared smile, the moment in the dance when your eyes met and stayed just a breath longer than they should have. You try to imagine what the other person is thinking now, and whether they too are staring into the dark with the same restless wondering. Sometimes the next day brings confirmation, another glance, another carefully timed passing in the corridor or lane. Other times, it brings distance, the person is nowhere to be seen, or they seem distracted, caught up in duties. In those moments, you question everything. Was it only your imagination? Did you read too much into a polite smile? In the medieval world, there's no way to find out instantly. No note passed through a friend will arrive in hours. No message will blink onto a screen. You have to wait. And waiting is the slow drumbeat of medieval flirtation. You wait for the next feast, the next mass, the next chance to see them in daylight. Each opportunity is precious, and each one could be the last. Not because anyone will banish you for a glance, but because life changes quickly. People are sent away to serve in other households, to marry, to join the clergy. One day they're across the table from you. The next, they're a memory, and you're left with only the echoes of a game that never reached its final move. The thought adds a strange sweetness to every encounter. You never know if the look you exchange tonight will be the last. And so you treat it like treasure, precious, fleeting, and impossible to hold for long. Somewhere deep down you realize this is part of why the game is so intoxicating. Modern love may have its speed and its certainty, but it rarely has the ache of a connection that might vanish before it's named. And as you turn these thoughts over in your mind, the day's work begins again, and the dance, slow, patient, and endlessly careful, moves one step forward. Days pass, and the rhythm of your world continues much as it always does, yet your awareness of it has shifted. The marketplace feels a little different now, not because the goods have changed, but because each stall, each turn of the path, that could be a place where the one you're thinking of might appear. You notice details you might once have overlooked, the bright strip of cloth fluttering from a merchant's tent, the smell of baked apples curling through the air from a pie stand, the sound of wooden carts rumbling over uneven cobblestones. All of it feels richer, as if your senses have been tuned for moments that may or may not arrive. The medieval market is a world of its own. Merchants call out in half-sung pitches, haggling spills into playful banter, and clusters of people gather to hear news carried from distant towns. Somewhere in the crowd you see them, the familiar turn of the head, the quick movement of their hands as they examine a string of beads or a bolt of cloth. You keep your distance at first, content just to watch, but eventually you find an excuse to draw nearer. Perhaps you approach the stall next to theirs, making a show of examining a jar of honey or a carved wooden spoon. You comment idly to the seller, but you're listening for their voice, waiting for that one moment when they might turn and see you. And when it happens, it's nothing dramatic, just a nod, maybe a faint smile, but it's enough to set the day humming inside you. In the market, flirtation often takes the form of shared errands. You might accidentally need advice on which cloth is better for a winter cloak, or they might ask your opinion on a tool or trinket. These conversations are public enough to be safe yet private in their undercurrent. Words that seem trivial to onlookers carry meaning for you both. There's a special thrill in exchanging something in plain sight. Imagine, for instance, that you purchase a small ribbon from a merchant, and as you hand over the coins, you manage to pass it discreetly to them instead of tucking it into your own pouch. No one else notices. Perhaps even they look down at it later, realizing only then what you've done. Sometimes flirtation at the market is aided by the presence of friends. A mutual acquaintance might joke lightly about the two of you, giving you the chance to deny everything with a laugh. But that denial, shared and mutual, is its own kind of intimacy. It's the conspiratorial kind, a game where the rules are as much about what you don't say as what you do. And yet markets are not without risk. You never know who might be watching, who might draw their own conclusions from the simplest glance. A word carried from one mouth to another can shape a reputation faster than the most deliberate action. This is why restraint is always part of the game. One look too long, one word too warm, and suddenly your name is on someone's lips in a way you didn't intend. But the day is not only about the market. There's work to do, perhaps, in the fields, in the kitchen, in the workshops. And even here, there's room for the dance to continue. You might find yourself hauling a basket past the door where they work, or stopping to exchange a few words while drawing water from the same well. These little intersections of daily life are like stones in a mosaic, each one small, but together forming the picture of something quietly growing. In some cases, a flirtation might find a rhythm in a shared task. Maybe you both help set up trestle tables before a feast or arrange rushes along the hall floor. There's the passing of objects, a plate, a pitcher with fingertips brushing for a fraction of a second. There's the side-by-side work where conversation can flow softly without drawing attention. Work offers a perfect cover for the exchange of smiles and glances, for asking about someone's day in a way that lingers just enough to mean more. If you're lucky, there might be an upcoming gathering that gives you a more open stage for this ongoing performance. Perhaps a wedding, a Saints' Day celebration, or the arrival of a traveling troupe of entertainers. These events are anticipated for weeks, and the undercurrent of excitement gives everyone permission to be a little more animated, a little more willing to be seen. At such gatherings, music plays a central role. The moment a drum beat starts, or a fiddler sets the tempo, the crowd responds. Dances in the medieval world are often structured with specific steps and patterns that move people in and out of each other's company. This is your chance to be partnered with them even briefly, under the entirely respectable pretense of tradition. Your hands meet as part of the dance, your eyes meet, because the steps require it, and yet in those moments, the world narrows to just the two of you. It's here in the lively swirl of dancers and the rise and fall of music that flirtation can become almost dizzying. A step forward, a step back, a turn, each motion carrying the possibility of an extra glance, a slightly closer touch. And when the dance ends, the shared smile carries the memory of all those fleeting contacts. Of course, the aftermath of such moments can be just as intoxicating. When the music stops and the crowd disperses, you carry the imprint of that closeness into the quiet of the evening. Perhaps you exchanged a word or two before parting. Nothing risky, just a polite remark about the dance or the music. But the real conversation is in what remains unsaid. Later, alone in your own space, you replay these encounters in your mind. The medieval world moves slowly, and each new step in the dance of flirtation is something to be savored. There's no rushing toward a resolution, no expectation that every connection must lead to a confession or proposal. The pleasure is in the stretch of time and the suspense that hangs between moments of contact. Still, there are moments when the uncertainty gnaws at you. Days when you see them talking easily with someone else and you wonder if your quiet game is theirs alone or if they play it with others too. Doubt is part of the experience and perhaps part of what keeps it so consuming. Every glance becomes a question, every smile a puzzle to solve. This is why so many of the songs and poems of the time dwell on longing more than fulfillment. Troubadour verses speak of the lady glimpsed from afar, the knight who dreams but cannot declare. It's not that love never comes to fruition, but that the space before it, the ache of waiting, the hope that builds in the pauses, is considered a worthy state in itself. When night comes again, the streets quiet, the shutters close. Inside the castle or the cottage, the world shrinks to the warm glow of a hearth, the sound of someone breathing softly nearby. And even then, your thoughts are out there somewhere in the market crowd, on the dance floor, at the well, walking beside them in memory. The fire burns low, the air grows still, and you know that tomorrow the dance will begin again, perhaps with a glance in the market. Perhaps with a word in passing, always slow, always careful, always carrying the thrill of what might be. The days grow shorter, and with them the hours of light in which to maneuver your careful game. Autumn in the medieval world creeps in quietly but decisively. The morning air bites at your fingertips, and the smell of damp earth lingers long after the sun rises. Leaves turn and fall, scattering across the courtyards, and village paths crunching softly underfoot as you make your way about your daily tasks. Season changes have a way of shifting the tone of flirtation. In summer, meetings might be casual, a chance encounter at the well, a moment in the open air. But in the cooler months, gatherings drift indoors, and with them the opportunities change. Fire-lit rooms, long benches drawn close to the hearth, the comfort of shared warmth. All of these create their own possibilities for the game you're playing. Imagine stepping into the great hall on a late afternoon. The light outside is fading fast, but here the torches and candles give everything a golden hue. The hearth crackles, and a faint haze of wood smoke drifts upward. People cluster in small groups, talking softly or listening to a traveling storyteller spin some ancient tale. It's in this intimate, enclosed world that glances seem more charged words, more deliberate. Perhaps you take a seat at the edge of a bench, not so close that anyone could accuse you of seeking them out, but near enough to catch their profile in the shifting firelight. A conversation begins not directly with them, but within earshot, and you watch for the little signs, a half smile at something you've said, the way their eyes flicker toward you in the pause between sentences. Here, a shared cup of spiced wine becomes an occasion. You pass it, fingers brushing against theirs, And in that brief touch is all the warmth of the fire and more. No one notices, or if they do, they see nothing out of place. But for you, the moment lasts longer than it should, echoing in the quiet corners of your mind. There's a kind of patience required in these colder months. The feasts are fewer, the dances less frequent, and so every chance must be savored. Even a simple errand can take on weight. Walking together through the courtyard, pulling your cloaks tight against the wind, you might exchange a remark about the weather. To anyone else, it's idle chatter. To you, it's a moment of togetherness, a chance to measure the tone of their voice, the ease of their smile. Sometimes the season offers its own gifts for subtle exchange. A cluster of dried berries tied with a twist of cloth, a strip of wool cut from a scrap in the sewing room. These small tokens carry a quiet intimacy. You might leave one where they'll find it, or hand it over with a casual remark about its usefulness. And perhaps later you'll catch a glimpse of it tucked into their pouch, or tied to their belt, a sign that they've kept it. Winter is coming, and with it the long, dark evenings that will draw people even closer together indoors. Fireside games and shared songs become common pastimes, and in their safety you can risk a little more. A riddle posed in jest, a verse recited with a glance that makes its meaning clear, these are the threads you weave into the fabric of your connection. But you must always keep an ear out for the undercurrent of talk in the room. Even in these intimate spaces, the wrong word or an ill-timed laugh can set gossip in motion. In a small medieval community, news travels fast, and reputation is both shield and target. One person's playful remark can be another's whispered scandal. There's a particular skill in flirting while keeping your place in the social order intact. If you're of a higher station, you must guard against appearing improper. If of a lower, you must take care not to seem presumptuous. The sweet spot lies in the gray area between the space where actions can be taken as friendship, courtesy, or something more, depending on who's watching. On one such evening, perhaps the two of you find yourselves side by side during the telling of a story. The room is hushed, the only sound the storyteller's voice and the soft hiss of logs in the fire. You lean in slightly to catch a detail, and they do the same. Your shoulders touch, and neither of you moves away. The story carries on, but for you it's only half heard. The real tale is unfolding in the space between you. Later, as the evening breaks up and people drift to their quarters, you linger a moment longer in the hall, waiting for the right opportunity. A parting word spoken softly so that only they can hear goodnight. Simple, harmless, but carrying the warmth of all that's been exchanged without a single direct admission. In the days that follow, you may not see them as often. Winter preparations demand attention, storing grain, mending clothing, ensuring animals are sheltered. Yet even in the busyness, your awareness of each other doesn't fade. You find yourself glancing toward the doorway when you hear footsteps or scanning the hall at mealtime for a glimpse of them. When at last you meet again, perhaps during a small gathering in the chapel or a shared chore in the kitchens. The familiarity between you is unspoken, but undeniable. You fall into conversation easily, though neither of you references the moments you've shared. It's understood, and in that understanding lies the true bond. Medieval flirtation thrives on this unspoken language. Words are used, yes, but they are rarely the main event. Far more is said in the pauses, in the way a glance lingers, in the casual yet intentional nearness of two people moving through the same space. You're always reading between the lines, finding meaning in what's left unsaid. In time, the season itself becomes part of your shared rhythm. The chill in the air makes every shared moment by the fire feel more precious. The short days lend a certain urgency. There's less light to waste fewer chances for an unplanned meeting. You adapt your game accordingly, making the most of each opportunity no matter how small. And as autumn deepens toward winter, you find that even the smallest exchanges hold more weight. A smile across a crowded room, a touch at the elbow when passing in a narrow hallway. A single word spoken quietly enough that you both know it wasn't meant for anyone else to hear. These are the moments that sustain the dance, carrying it forward through the long nights to come. When you finally retire to your own bed on such a night, the hall quiet behind you, you carry the warmth of those moments like an ember tucked into your chest. Outside, the wind moves through the bare branches, and somewhere in the dark, a barn door creaks. But inside, in the private corners of your thoughts, the fire is still burning. Tomorrow will bring its own set of duties, its own challenges. But it will also bring the possibility of another glance, another word, another turn in the endless, careful waltz that is medieval flirting. And so you drift toward sleep, already half imagining how the next chapter will unfold. The first frost comes almost without warning. One morning when you step outside, the grass is glazed with a thin, sparkling crust, and your breath puffs white into the still air. The smells of the season change: less earth and leaf, more wood smoke and drying herbs. People move with a new urgency, now finishing repairs before the deep winter sets in. The world feels sharper, quieter, but in that quiet, your little game continues to weave itself between moments of work and ritual. Frosty mornings mean gatherings in closer quarters. The great hall becomes the beating heart of the household. It's where news is shared, where disputes are settled, and where the warmth of the fire draws people together in the evenings. You might catch sight of them there, standing with others near the hearth, their face lit amber by the flames. That one glimpse is enough to send a ripple through you, a reminder that even in the thick of work, something softer is unfolding beneath the surface. Flirtation, in this season, becomes more about proximity than chance encounters. The cold forces everyone into shared spaces, so the game shifts from finding opportunities to linger near them, to finding ways to make those inevitable nearnesses mean more. It's in the small choices, sitting 2 places closer than you did last week, offering a cloak for a walk between buildings, or handing them a cup of hot ale without waiting to be asked. At times, you might pass an evening together at a long table surrounded by others talking about the day's work or some recent bit of news. To the casual observer, you're part of a group conversation, but to you, each exchange is threaded with small cues, a smile held just for them, a remark turned in their direction more than anyone else's. And when your eyes meet, there's that flash of recognition, the silent acknowledgement that you're still playing the same game. One of the season's quiet joys is shared work indoors. You might both be involved in preparing dried herbs for winter, plucking them from their stalks, and tying them in bundles to hang from the rafters. Or perhaps you're mending torn garments side by side at a sewing bench, the rhythmic motion of the needle giving your hands something to do, while your minds drift to other things. The work is practical, necessary, but also slow, and in that slowness lies the space for small conversations and glances that would go unnoticed elsewhere. There are also the walks. Even in the cold, certain tasks require going outdoors, fetching water, tending to animals, gathering firewood. If you happen to take such a walk together, the quiet of the frosted morning, seems to wrap around you. Your boots crunch on the frozen ground, and the sounds of the household fade behind you. This is a rare kind of privacy in the medieval world, and though you speak of simple things, the stubbornness of a mule, the promise of snow, each word carries the added pleasure of being exchanged alone. Sometimes you might take a small liberty in these moments, adjusting their cloak if it slips from their shoulder, brushing away a bit of frost from their sleeve. These gestures are easily explained should anyone ask, but they're not meant for others. They're meant for the way your heart lifts when they look at you afterward. Inside the season also invites more communal amusements. Board games of the time, simple but absorbing, can bring you into closer company. Sitting across a board of 9 men's Morris or a scattering of bones for a dice game gives you the chance to watch each other's faces in concentration, to tease gently over a good move to lean in when the rules are questioned. And sometimes losing a game gracefully can be its own kind of signal. Then there are the evenings when a storyteller visits. Everyone gathers wrapped in blankets or cloaks, listening to tales of saints, heroes, or ancient lovers. You might be seated close enough that your knees almost touch, or that your shoulders brush when you both lean forward at some dramatic moment. In the dim light, surrounded by others who are focused on the story, it's easier to let those small points of contact linger a heartbeat longer. But as the cold deepens, so does the risk of the game becoming too visible. In tight quarters, people notice patterns quickly. The same 2 people sitting near each other at every meal or speaking more often than others, these things draw comment. And once comment begins, it's difficult to silence. So you temper your boldness, spacing out your moments of attention, making sure that each is small enough to pass as chance. That's the paradox of medieval flirting in winter. The closeness you crave is easier to find, but harder to hide. And so you measure each step, guarding your shared understanding, while feeding it just enough to keep it alive. When the snow finally comes, it transforms everything. The world outside is muffled and still, as though someone has drawn a blanket over the land. Paths are harder to walk, travel slows, and the household turns inward completely. Days become measured by meals, prayers, and the steady tending of fires. It's in this enclosed world that even the most ordinary encounters feel intimate. Imagine passing them in a narrow hallway, the air scented faintly with baking bread. There's no room to pass without brushing against each other, and in that moment, the contact is more electric than it had any right to be. Or picture standing beside them at the hearth, both of you holding your hands out toward the flames, feeling the heat seep slowly into your bones. A simple glance sideways is all it takes to confirm, yes, the spark is still there. In this season, tokens take on new significance. A piece of cloth sewn into a warm lining, a small bundle of dried fruit tucked into a pocket, a candle stub given with a remark about the dark evenings, but with an unspoken hope that they'll think of you when it burns. These are the kinds of gifts that carry meaning without ever speaking it aloud. And at night, when the household sleeps, the hall is dark and quiet. You might pass each other in the corridor on the way to the privy, pausing just long enough to murmur a greeting in a voice softer than the wind outside. It's nothing anyone else would notice, but for you, it's the thread that keeps this tapestry of glances and half-smiles woven tight. You come to understand in this cold season that the heart of medieval flirting isn't in declarations or confessions. It's in the discipline of keeping something alive without forcing it into the open. It's the art of creating a shared world that exists entirely in the spaces between what others can see. And so the frost thickens, the nights stretch long, and your game continues as careful and deliberate as ever, yet warmed by the knowledge that they too are playing it with you. The snow outside deepens, and the medieval world becomes smaller still. Paths to the market are buried, the fields lie dormant, and life contracts to the walls of the household. This is when flirtation becomes an exercise in living within sight of someone without ever truly being alone with them. Every action, every word is in public view, but public here doesn't mean a bustling crowd. It means the quiet presence of others always within earshot, always moving through the same spaces. In the mornings, the air in the great hall is still chilled from the night, even with the hearth's embers glowing low. People drift in, slowly wrapped in cloaks, their breath faintly visible in the cold. You might find yourself at the table when they enter, pretending to focus on a crust of bread or the turning of a cup in your hand. But your awareness shifts the moment they appear, a ripple you feel before you even raise your eyes. A greeting here is often just a nod or a murmured good morrow. But in the language of your game, the way those words are said matters as much as the words themselves. A hint of warmth in the tone, a fraction longer pause before they look away. These are the handshakes and embraces your world allows. Tasks fill the day, mending harnesses, sorting grain, checking stored food for spoilage. Sometimes by luck or careful timing, you end up working within sight of them. A glance across the room becomes a thread to pull at in your thoughts. Did they notice you watching? Did they choose their place for the same reason you did? Winter chores often require cooperation. You might be sent to fetch water together, carrying buckets from the well, the cold air sharpening your breath and reddening your fingers. Conversation on such walks is brief practical words about the weight of the buckets or whether the ice is thick enough to walk on, but the silences hold their own charge. Every step in unison feels like a shared secret. Inside space is limited, so people cluster where the light is best. Sewing, carding wool, or repairing tools is easier near a window or close to the fire. This nearness breeds familiarity. You begin to know the sound of their voice in the murmur of the room, the way their laugh rises above the rest. You learn which seat they tend to take, and they may learn the same of you. On certain days, a peddler or entertainer braves the snow to visit. These visits become small festivals in themselves. People gather to see the wares, to hear a story, to play at guessing the endings of riddles. If the two of you happen to stand near each other, you can trade small comments under the cover of general noise. Your words might be nothing more than observations about a piece of cloth or the turn of a tale, but each is another stitch in the quiet tapestry you're weaving. The game also moves into the realm of shared amusements. Chess, for example, rare in the lower classes, but common in noble households, is a perfect cover. A game can last for hours, drawing you into a slow, thoughtful rhythm where your focus is divided between the board and the person across it. Each move becomes a chance to hold their gaze, to measure the flicker of a smile or the tightening of a brow. And if you lose, there's the easy excuse to suggest another game tomorrow. Winter evenings are long, and music fills them more often than in the warmer months. Someone might sing a ballad by the fire, their voice carrying through the dim room. You might request a song whose meaning is known to you both, nothing so obvious that others would comment, but enough to draw a shared glance when a certain verse comes. And if the music turns to dance, even in the small space of the hall, the opportunity to touch hands in a formal pattern is one you both silently anticipate. Still, you must be cautious. In winter's close quarters, gossip doesn't travel far. It doesn't have to. The wrong look caught by the wrong eyes can feed an entire evening's worth of speculation. And here, speculation has teeth. It can slip into judgment before you even hear the first whisper, so you pace yourself. Some days you allow no contact at all, trusting the absence to sharpen the edge of your connection. Yet absence in such a small world is relative. Even when you don't speak, you're aware of each other's movements. You notice when they leave the hall, when they pass down the corridor, when their voice rises in conversation with someone else. And though you say nothing, each of these moments etches itself into your private map of the day. There's a strange comfort in this rhythm. The world outside may be frozen, but inside a kind of slow-burning warmth persists. Your flirtation becomes a steady ember, never bursting into flame, never going out. It's a patience that feels less like waiting and more like living in the middle of a story that you and they are writing together, one glance at a time. Occasionally, the season offers an unexpected gift, a brief moment of privacy. Perhaps you're both sent to check the storehouse at the far end of the courtyard. The snow crunches beneath your boots. The air stings your cheeks, and for a few heartbeats, there's no one else in sight. You speak of practical things, whether the grain barrels look sound, whether the latch needs repair, but beneath the words, the quiet thrill hums. On the walk back, a small touch. A hand steadying an elbow on an icy patch carries the weight of an entire conversation left unspoken. Evenings sometimes end with these small flashes of closeness. As people drift off to their beds, the hall grows quiet, the light dimming to a glow. You might find yourselves the last two at a table finishing the dregs of a shared drink. You speak softly, mindful of sleeping ears nearby, and though the words are plain, the moment is wrapped in the intimacy of the hour. When you part for the night, it's with the knowledge that the same walls, the same routines will bring you together again tomorrow. In this frozen season, you don't chase grand gestures or dramatic turns. You cultivate the constancy of the game, a shared understanding that endures not because it's spoken, but because it's lived day after day in the steady glow of familiarity. You realize lying in your narrow bed that medieval flirting is less about moving forward toward a defined end and more about holding the line. It's about keeping a thread taut without snapping it, about creating a small secret world in plain sight. And as you drift toward sleep, listening to the wind moan faintly against the shutters, you know that in the morning, the first thing you'll listen for before the clatter of breakfast, before the call to work, is the sound of their voice. The cold lingers, but the days have begun to stretch just a little. At first, it's only a few moments more of daylight in the evening, not enough to change your work, but enough to feel the shift. That extra sliver of light seems to soften everyone's mood, and with it, your game gains a little more room to breathe. Winter has a way of teaching patience, and you've learned it well. The slow, careful pace of your flirtation has become almost second nature. Yet even in this steady rhythm, there are moments of sudden brightness. A glance in the right moment, a smile that seems to belong only to you. These are enough to turn an ordinary day into something you'll remember. The season offers its own kinds of shared experiences. You might find yourselves working side by side to mend nets for fishing, though the water is still locked under ice. Or perhaps you're repairing tools together, the scrape of metal on metal, a steady backdrop to quiet conversation. Work like this is grounding practical, yet it gives your minds a chance to drift into lighter talk, into stories of past festivals or dreams for the coming spring. One of the pleasures of this time is the way even the smallest shared labor feels like a bond. Carrying wood from the stack to the hearth, sweeping out the hall together, laying fresh rushes along the floor. These are humble tasks, but they're done in steps side by side with a rhythm that belongs to the two of you alone. And when your hands meet in passing a piece of wood, or your shoulders brush as you bend to spread the rushes, there's a quiet recognition in the glance that follows. Occasionally, the monotony of the season is broken by visitors. A wandering friar might stop by to preach, bringing news from distant towns. A merchant could arrive with small luxuries, fine combs, beads, spiced nuts. Such occasions draw the household together in curiosity, and in the bustle you find little opportunities. Perhaps you comment on a trinket you think they might like, or they hand you a sweetmeat from a tray, their fingers grazing yours in the handover. These gestures are fleeting, yet they warm the air between you. Evening gatherings often turn to storytelling in this season. Someone recites a legend of a knight's quest or a lady's clever escape from danger. The room grows still as the tale winds on, and you might find yourself seated close enough to feel the brush of their sleeve against your arm. Sometimes you risk leaning in slightly to hear better, not so much because you need to, but because the moment invites it. Games continue to be a favored pastime. Dice games especially have an unpredictable excitement. The clatter of bone on wood draws attention, and the playful competition can loosen the reserve that winter enforces. If you play against them, you might let a small victory pass to their side, earning a smile that feels like your real prize. Or you might take the win yourself, teasing them gently, just enough to make the exchange sparkle. There's a certain delight in watching them with others too, not in the sense of jealousy, but in seeing how they carry themselves, how their laugh rings in a group. These glimpses remind you that your connection is a choice, not an accident. And when they glance your way mid-conversation, as though to check you've seen their smile, it's a small proof that the choice is mutual. Sometimes the best moments happen when you're both caught in an unplanned pause. Perhaps the hall is momentarily empty, the others having drifted away to fetch something or tend to a chore. For a brief moment, you're alone. The silence feels heavier without the murmur of voices, and in that quiet, you exchange a look that says everything. No words are needed, the moment itself is the message. These pauses don't last long, of course. Someone always returns the spell, broken by footsteps or a voice calling from another room. But the memory of that instant, the awareness that both of you felt it, stays with you. There's a kind of craft to keeping the game alive in such a small, watchful world. You vary the distance between you, sometimes keeping it wide enough to look accidental, other times allowing it to shrink just enough for a touch in passing. You keep your exchanges brief in public, but load them with meaning in tone or glance. You let the rest of the world believe you are simply two people moving through the same routines, while underneath you're working in perfect synchrony. As the days lengthen, the festivals of early spring begin to appear on the horizon. There's talk of a celebration for the feast day of a local saint, and with it, the possibility of music, dancing, and open laughter. The idea stirs the whole household. People begin making small repairs to clothing, digging out ribbons and bits of finery that have been stored since autumn. For you, this is more than just a change in routine. It's the promise of a new setting for your ongoing play, one with more movement, more noise, more excuse to linger close. A festival allows liberties that the closed, fire-lit hall does not. You might find yourself in a line of dancers, your hand finding theirs in the turn. You might slip them a sweetmeat from a market stall, pressing it into their palm with a look. Until then, you keep to your steady pace. The quiet winter days still hold their own magic after all. Even a shared glance while hanging herbs to dry, or a laugh over a stubborn knot in a rope carries the same current you felt since the game began. And at night, when the wind sighs against the shutters and the hall falls silent, you hold on to the knowledge that soon the season will shift. The snow will melt, the paths will open, and your flirtation will step into the open air again. But for now, it's enough to know that here in the hush of winter, the connection is still alive, patient, deliberate, and ready for the spring to come. The first hints of spring arrive almost timidly. The snow doesn't vanish overnight. Instead, it slumps into itself, softening at the edges, shrinking back from the paths. Patches of bare earth appear here and there, slick with meltwater. The air changes too. There's still a bite in it, but beneath that bite is a damp, earthy scent that feels like a promise. People notice. They linger outside a little longer, lift their faces to the sun when it breaks through the clouds. The mood shifts subtly, and with it the tone of your quiet game begins to change. The household stirs with a new kind of busyness. Stores of food are checked, tools are inspected for the coming planting season. Repairs that were put off during the cold months are suddenly urgent. The rhythm of the day gains more movement, more reasons to cross the courtyard or walk the length of the hall. These changes bring fresh chances for brief encounters, no longer just in the fire-lit evening, but in the brisk daylight where eyes meet without the shadows to hide behind. You might see them hauling a basket of seed, the weight making their shoulders shift in a way you can't help but watch. Or perhaps they pass you on the steps, a wisp of hair escaping their hood cheeks, flushed from the cold. The glance you exchange is still discreet, but now there's a quickness to it, like a spark leaping in dry tinder. With the thaw comes more work outdoors, and this changes everything. Where winter forced you into the same few enclosed spaces, spring lets you meet in open air again. There's more room for movement, for walking together under the excuse of a task, for standing just slightly too close while inspecting a fence post or sorting through a pile of timber. The air itself feels like it's leaning toward possibility. Festivals begin to creep back into the calendar, starting with small observances. A Saint's Day might be marked with a modest feast music in the evening and a few dances in the hall. You might find yourself circling the floor in a line dance, your hand catching theirs in the pattern. Even if it's only for the length of a few steps, the warmth of that contact lingers. You release hands when the dance demands it, but the memory holds fast. Spring also loosens conversation. People talk more, laugh more easily. You can slip a teasing remark into a shared task without it seeming too forward. The games of the winter months, chess dice riddles, give way to games that can be played outdoors. You might find yourselves tossing a ball or playing a form of quoits. It's pretending not to notice how often your paths intersect. There's a freshness in the way light falls now. In the mornings, it spills through the windows earlier, catching in the motes of dust stirred by movement in the hall. You catch sight of them more often, and each time feels less like luck and more like inevitability. The season works in your favor. People expect to see each other more, to work together more. What was once carefully arranged now feels like it could happen by chance. The thaw also opens the way for short trips beyond the immediate grounds. You might walk together to a nearby meadow to check the growth of early herbs or to the riverbank to see if the ice has broken. These walks have a rhythm all their own, the crunch of boots on softening ground, the calls of returning birds overhead, the quiet stretches where words feel unnecessary. In these moments, you feel the edges of the game blur, as though what you're doing is less a pretense and more simply the way things are meant to be. Still, you don't rush. Medieval flirtation thrives on restraint, on letting the possibilities stretch like a bowstring drawn but not yet loosed. Even as spring offers more opportunities, you keep some distance, preserving the tension that makes each contact matter. If you speak of the coming planting, you do it lightly. If you laugh at their remark, you let the laugh fade naturally. You don't push for more than the season is ready to give. There's also the shared awareness that the warmer months will change the household's shape. People will be sent on errands, fields will call for longer hours, duties will scatter you both into different corners of the day. The closeness of winter will dissolve into the wide spread of work across the land. This makes the present all the more precious. Every exchange now is stored away like a treasure against the busy days ahead. When a larger festival arrives, perhaps the Feast of St. George or another spring celebration, it feels like a holiday for your heart, as much as for the calendar. The entire community comes alive. Stalls appear in the market square, with bright cloths, fresh bread, and the first green shoots sold in bundles. Musicians play under makeshift awnings, their tunes spilling into the air. The space between people loosens. Laughter comes in waves. In such a setting, the boundaries of your flirtation can stretch a little. You might walk together openly among the stalls, pausing to look at the same wares, your shoulders nearly touching. You might stand side by side to watch a juggler sharing the same smile at a well-caught ball. And if you're lucky, you might find a moment in the shifting crowd where no one is watching too closely, and you can let your hand brush theirs for just a little longer than necessary. Dances at such festivals are freer than the measured ones of the hall. You can spin them through the air in a circle, catch them in the turn, feel the press of their palm against yours as the music drives the steps faster. Your faces are close enough for a shared breath, and in that moment you both know this is still a game, but one that's leaning towards something more real. When the festival ends and the crowd begins to drift away under the fading light, you feel the shift again. The days will keep lengthening, the work will keep growing, but the memory of this open, sunlit flirtation will carry you forward. You've stepped briefly into a wider space, one where the rules can bend just a little more than usual, and it's a taste of what the warmer months might bring. That night back in the quiet of your bed, you think about the way their hand felt in yours during the dance, about the look you exchanged at the market stall. Spring has opened the door a little wider, but you're still standing in the doorway, letting the moment stretch. The game isn't over. If anything, it's become richer, fuller, and more dangerous in its possibilities. And as you drift toward sleep, you know that tomorrow will bring another chance, maybe at the market, maybe in the fields, maybe in some unplanned crossing of paths. The season is turning, and with it the story is gathering speed. Spring pushes forward, shedding the last traces of winter's grip. The days are longer now, stretching into soft, gold-edged evenings. The ground has firmed underfoot, and the air is alive with scents, damp earth, fresh grass, the faint sweetness of early blossoms. Birds weave their calls into the daily hum, and people seem lighter in step, as if the thaw has worked its way into their bones. With all this brightness, your game shifts again. Work moves out into the open fields. The household scatters across the land, some to plow, some to sow seed, others to tend livestock. You're no longer hemmed in by stone walls and torchlight. Instead, you have the wide sky overhead and the chance to meet in places where the air is clear and no one is listening. It's a freedom that feels almost strange after the closeness of winter, but also thrilling. Tasks now bring you into the same orbit in new ways. You might be sent to help repair a fence where they're all ready, working, the two of you passing tools back and forth under the bright sun. Or perhaps you both take a cart down to the meadow to gather fallen branches, the journey giving you time to talk about nothing important, but with the ease of two people who know exactly what's going on beneath the surface. These moments outdoors change the texture of your flirtation. In winter, every glance was stolen in a crowd. Now you can look openly for a heartbeat or two without fear. In the wide daylight, you can walk side by side, and no one will think it strange if your arms brush as you move. Even a shared silence feels rich out here, filled with the quiet background of wind in the grass and the far-off call of crows. Spring also brings gatherings of a different sort, planting feasts where neighbors help each other with the heavy work and then share a meal afterward. These are not as formal as winter banquets. People sit on benches in the open air, food spread on trestles, or even on clean cloths laid on the grass. Music is simpler, but the mood is light, and laughter comes easily. You might find yourself sitting just across from them, trading small remarks about the food, the weather, or some bit of gossip from the next village over. The warmth of the season loosens the rules. A shared cup is nothing now, just a convenience. A hand on the arm to draw someone's attention is no cause for whispers. But for you, these little permissions are golden. Each one is a chance to deepen the quiet understanding between you without stepping outside the bounds of propriety. One of the great gifts of spring is the chance to walk home from such gatherings in the lingering twilight. If you're lucky, the path will take you both in the same direction for a while. The others in your group might drift ahead or fall behind, leaving the two of you to talk in low voices as the air cools and the sky deepens from blue to violet. These walks are not long, but they feel as though they belong entirely to you. You learn, too, to read the way they look at you now, not just the quick glances of winter, but the steadier gaze of someone who's not afraid to let you see their interest. It's a different kind of thrill, less about the chase and more about the acknowledgement. There's a quiet pleasure in knowing that they trust you enough to meet your eyes without fear of being misunderstood. But with the openness of the season comes a new kind of caution. Out here, gossip doesn't just come from within the household. Villagers, field hands, passers-by all have eyes and tongues. A laugh shared at the wrong moment, or a walk that lasts a little too long, can still spark talk. So you keep the game balanced, enough contact to keep it alive, enough restraint to keep it safe. Sometimes the work itself offers cover for something a little more. Tying off a bundle of kindling together might mean your hands meet over the cord. Checking the edge of a scythe might bring you close enough to feel their breath for just a moment. Even passing a pail of water can be a small performance. The weight shifting between your hands, the brief overlap of touch. The markets grow livelier now too, with more goods flowing in from nearby towns. Trips to the market are a chance to mingle with the crowd, to stroll together past stalls selling early fruit bolts of cloth jars of honey. You might pause at the same table to examine a carving or a trinket, exchanging a few words over its craftsmanship. In the press of the crowd, it's easy to be near without drawing notice, and in that nearness to let your hand brush theirs in passing. If you manage it, you might even buy them something small, a ribbon perhaps, or a sprig of herbs. You hand it over with a casual remark about how it suited them, knowing that the gesture says far more than the words. And later, when you see them wearing it or keeping it close, it feels like a quiet victory in your ongoing match. Festivals in this season have their own charm. Unlike winter feasts, they spill out into the open. Dancing happens on the green under the sky with music carried on the breeze. You join the line moving with the pattern of steps, your hand finding theirs in the turn. The grass beneath your feet, the laughter around you, the way the sunlight catches in their hair. All of it folds into the moment until you feel the rest of the world fall away. And when the music ends and you step apart, the warmth of that contact lingers. It's in the look they give you before turning to speak to someone else, in the way your hands almost meet again as you both leave the circle. By the time the sun sets, the day feels fuller than it has in months. You carry the memory of it with you into the evening, replaying each glance, each word, each subtle crossing of the invisible line between you. The night feels softer somehow, the stars brighter, as if the season itself approves of your quiet courtship. And lying in bed, you know that the rhythm of spring is still only beginning. The days will grow longer, yet the festivals more frequent, the excuses for open company more plentiful. But even now, in these early warm days, you can feel the change in the air, not just in the season, but in the way they look at you, the way your steps seem to find each other more often than not. The game is still careful, still unspoken, but it is no longer just about what might happen someday. It is about what is happening now, in the open fields, and the busy market, and the slow walks home. The careful chess match of winter has become a dance in the sunlight, still deliberate, still precise, but with a little more freedom in each step. And as you drift into sleep, you can't help but think, if this is only the beginning of spring, what will summer bring? Summer arrives like a held breath finally released. The sun rises early, spilling gold over the fields, and lingers late into the evening, stretching the day into a warm, slow-moving river of light. The air hums with the sound of bees, meadows, and the rustle of crops growing tall. People move with a different energy now, faster in the cool mornings, slower in the heat of the day, more restless as twilight drapes itself across the land. Your game shifts again. The crowded, torch-lit rooms of winter are a memory now. Instead, the stage for your flirtation is the open air, the fields, the market square, the shaded edges of the wood where paths meet before bending away again. There's more freedom in this, but also more unpredictability. The warmth loosens tongues, and a careless word in the wrong ear can travel faster than the winter wind ever could. Work pulls you both into the heart of the season's labor. Harvesting early crops, tending livestock, repairing tools under the shade of an oak, these tasks bring you into the same spaces without effort. You might pass them a basket, heavy with vegetables, the brief contact of your fingers sparking like flint. Or perhaps you stop to help them lift a sack of grain, your shoulders brushing as you set it down together. Out here, the casual intimacy of shared work feels as natural as the sun overhead. The summer market is a riot of color and scent. Stalls overflow with fresh fruit flowers, bright cloth jars of honey, and pickled vegetables. The crowd is louder now, more boisterous than in the cooler months. You might walk through it together, weaving between merchants' cries and the jingle of coins in pouches. At one stall, you pause to admire a small carved brooch, pretending to study the craftsmanship, while catching the reflection of their face in the polished surface. Sometimes you risk more in the anonymity of the crowd. A light touch at the elbow to guide them past a group of laughing children. A shared bite of something bought hot from a vendor, your fingers brushing as you pass it back. A remark whispered so close they feel the warmth of your breath. These are fleeting gestures, but in the noise and bustle of the market, they are invisible to everyone but the two of you. Summer also brings fairs and festivals of a grander scale. The celebrations spill far beyond the edges of the green, with tents for games, stalls for ale, and traveling performers who gather eager circles of spectators. These events are a gift to your game. The constant movement, the mingling of faces from neighboring villages, the endless reasons to drift in and out of each other's company. Perhaps you meet in the line for a game of strength, teasing each other about who will win. Or you stand together at the edge of a puppet show, laughing at the antics of painted wooden faces. You might find a moment to walk away from the noise, slipping into the quieter edge of the fairgrounds, where the hum of voices fades and the air smells faintly of trampled grass. Here your words can stretch a little further, your glance can linger a little longer. But even in the freedom of summer, caution still has its place. The openness of the season means more eyes, more ears. The same easy nearness that draws you together can also be noticed by others, and you know that a single pointed question could unravel the careful work you've built over months. So you keep the game balanced, letting the heat and light color your exchanges without burning through the fabric of your restraint. Evenings are their own kind of stage. The work of the day done, people gather in the fading light to talk, to eat, to sing. You might find yourselves sitting side by side on the low wall of a courtyard, your knees brushing as you share a cup of watered wine. The air is warm, the scent of herbs drifts in from the garden, and the slow murmur of conversation wraps the moment in a kind of safety. Sometimes there's music, a fiddle, a drum, the clap of hands to set a rhythm. Dancing in summer feels different from the formal patterns of winter, looser, more playful, more willing to let partners spin close. A hand at the waist might linger a moment longer than the steps demand. A turn might draw you close enough that you can see the shine of sweat at their temple, the curve of their smile as they catch your eye. There's also the chance for walks after dark. Summer nights are warm enough to stay out long after the sun slips below the horizon. The air carries the chirp of crickets, the faint glow of fireflies drifting at the edges of fields. Walking side by side in the near dark feels like stepping into a private world, one where the rules bend under the weight of the stars. Here, you can speak more freely, letting small truths slip into the conversation. Perhaps you tell them about a dream you had, something strange or funny or quietly revealing. Or they tell you a story from their childhood, the kind of detail they haven't shared with anyone else in the household. These exchanges knit you closer, making the game less about gestures and more about the slow shaping of trust. There are moments, too, when the heat of the season seems to push everything closer to the edge. The way their hand brushes yours when you both reach for the same jug of water. The way your gaze meets across the shimmer of the air above a sun-baked field. The way a laugh between you turns into a silence that feels loaded with possibility. You sense that the boundary between the game and something more is thinner now than it's ever been. But summer is also fleeting. You can already feel the weight of days moving forward, carrying you toward the next turn of the year. The festivals will fade, the fields will change, the household's duties will shift again. You know that the open-air freedom of this season won't last forever, and that makes each shared moment feel sharper, brighter, more worth holding on to. At night, when you lie in your bed with the window open to the warm breeze, you think about the way their voice sounded in the twilight, the way their hand felt in yours during a spin of the dance. You turn these moments over in your mind, like coins feeling their weight, counting them carefully. And you know, as you drift toward sleep, that whatever autumn brings you will carry the gold of these summer days with you, not just in memory, but in the way they've deepened the quiet, careful connection between you. The game you began in winter has grown into something richer, something stronger, and though it still hides behind glances and light touches, it now beats with the warmth of the summer sun. The first hints of autumn are easy to miss at first. A faint coolness threads its way into the mornings, lingering until the sun climbs high. The evenings draw in just a little earlier, their light a touch softer, more golden. You notice it in the way shadows stretch across the fields, in the rustle of leaves that sound just a shade drier than they did a week ago. The air is still warm, but it carries the faint scent of change. The mood of the household shifts with the season. There's a sense of urgency now, a quiet pressure to prepare for the colder months ahead. The talk around the hall and the yard turns to harvesting, storing, mending. You and they are pulled into the steady work of gathering what summer has given. Harvest time offers its own kind of freedom and its own opportunities. Whole days are spent outside side by side with others working under the same wide sky. You might move between rows of grain, the sound of scythes and the swish of stalks in your ears. Or you might work in the orchard, reaching for fruit just out of arm's length, the sun warm on your back. It's in these long, open days that your game takes on a quieter tone. The gestures are smaller, the glances shorter, not because the connection has faded, but because the work is constant. Here, flirtation is folded into the rhythm of labor. You pass a bucket of apples to them, your hands meeting briefly over the handle. You share a drink of water from the same ladle, your lips touching where theirs have just been. You walk back from the fields together at the end of the day, too tired for much talk, but content in the easy company of their presence. Autumn festivals are different from the bright fairs of summer. They're earthier, more rooted in the satisfaction of a season's work well done. The green is dotted with stalls selling roasted chestnuts, spiced cider, and baked goods still warm from the oven. Musicians play slower tunes, ones meant for dancing, in tighter circles for swaying more than spinning. In the softer light of autumn, the dances feel more intimate. You hold their hand in the turn, but the grip is steadier, the movement slower. You might lean a little closer to speak over the music, your breath carrying the faint scent of whatever sweet you've just eaten. The air is cool enough now that you might offer your cloak, draping it lightly over their shoulders, a gesture as practical as it is personal. The harvest also brings gatherings indoors in the evenings. People bring what they've made or preserved to share jars of pickles, loaves of bread, dried herbs. These gatherings are less boisterous than summers, but no less rich in the small moments that feed your game. You might sit beside them shelling nuts, the crack and snap of the shells punctuating your low-voiced conversation. Or you might help arrange food on a table, moving around each other in a slow, practiced dance that no one else seems to notice. The changing season gives you a sharper awareness of time. You know the days will keep shortening, that the cold will come creeping back. In this brief in-between, you savor each shared glance in the fading evening light, each walk back from the field with the sun low at your back. The connection feels seasoned now, matured like the harvest itself, still unspoken but deeper for all the months it has grown quietly beneath the surface. Sometimes in the middle of work, you catch sight of them across the yard or down a row of crops. The sight is enough to remind you of the long road you've traveled together, from the careful glances of winter to the freer exchanges of summer, and now into this mellow, ripening autumn. The game has changed shape with the seasons, but it's still the same at its core, a slow weaving of small private threads through the fabric of public life. One evening after a long day of gathering, you find yourselves walking the last stretch back to the hall together. The air is cool enough to see your breath, and the first stars are pricking the sky. The fields are quiet now, the rows of stubble ghostly in the fading light. Your footsteps fall in easy rhythm, and though you say little, the silence between you is comfortable, companionable. Back in the hall, the fire is already lit, and the smell of something hearty, a stew or a roast, fills the air. You sit with the others, but the tiredness of the day has loosened everyone's guard. Conversation drifts lazily, and no one notices that you've settled closer than usual, your knees brushing under the table. You pass them a piece of bread, and when their fingers graze yours, you let the contact linger just long enough to mean something. Later, as the evening winds down, someone begins to sing a low, steady ballad about two lovers parted by distance. The room quiets to listen, and in the half-light of the fire, you let your eyes meet theirs across the table. No one else sees the look you exchange, but in that gaze is the whole arc of your year together. The patience of winter, the brightness of spring, the freedom of summer, and now the ripening closeness of autumn. The song ends and the spell breaks. People begin to drift off to their beds, the hall growing quiet again. You part with the usual words, good night and a nod. But behind them is an unspoken truth that these days are numbered, that soon the world will draw in again, and your game will return to the closer, more careful spaces of the cold months. You go to bed with the faint sound of the ballad still in your ears, the glow of the fire still behind your eyes, and the warmth of their presence still in your chest. Autumn may be fleeting, but it's rich, and you intend to gather as much of it as you can before the frost sets in again. And as you drift into sleep, you know that when the next season comes, the game will change once more, but it will still be yours. The frosts return quietly, as they always do, first as a glimmer in the early mornings, silvering the grass and edges of the thatch, then as a hard bite that lingers through the day. The air sharpens, pulling color from the trees, until the leaves drop entirely, leaving bare branches clawing at the sky. You can feel the year folding in on itself again, the way it did before, drawing people back toward the hearth and the shelter of thick stone walls. With the cold comes a return to the closeness of indoor life. The household once again gathers in the same few rooms, the great hall, the kitchens, the smaller chambers where work and warmth can be shared. The spaces feel more crowded now, not in a way that leaves no room to move, but in a way that makes every movement part of a shared rhythm. Your flirtation adjusts to fit the season just as it did before. Gone are the open-air strolls and the wide spaces between you. Instead, you return to the subtle play of proximity, sitting near enough that your knees brush beneath the table, leaning close to speak when the noise of a busy room makes it necessary. A touch on the arm to pass a cup, the faintest graze of fingers. When handing over a tool, these become the quiet pulse of your connection. Work in the cold months has its own kind of intimacy. You might both be set to mending nets in the hall, your hands working in steady rhythm as you talk about the smallest details of the day. Or you might join in preparing food for the winter stores, peeling root vegetables side by side at a long bench. The work is repetitive, which means the mind can wander and sometimes wander into stories, jokes, or small confidences shared in low voices that make you feel the rest of the room has fallen away. The return of longer evenings indoors also brings back the games you learned to love the previous winter. Chess pieces moved with deliberate thought. Dice clattering across a wooden table. Riddles exchanged between turns of work. And though the games are the same, the way you play them has shifted. There's more ease now, more warmth. Months of shared glances and carefully measured contact have turned this from a quiet curiosity into something with its own steady heartbeat. Storytelling nights return as well. You sit close in the firelight, listening to tales of saints, heroes, and ancient lovers whose fortunes rise and fall with the turn of fate. The stories are familiar, but they feel different now because of who you're hearing them with. Sometimes when a certain verse or moment in the story lands, just so you exchange a quick glance, a silent acknowledgement that you both caught the same meaning. Festivals in these colder months are smaller, but they still offer rare opportunities. A midwinter feast might draw guests from neighboring households, filling the hall with music and laughter. The dances return to their more formal patterns, giving you the excuse to take their hand in a way that's perfectly respectable but no less charged for it. Even a turn around the floor in the measured steps of a pavan feels like something you'll carry with you for weeks afterward. The cold also makes every gesture of warmth mean more. If they offer you a seat nearer the fire, it feels like more than just kindness. If you share a cup of mulled wine, the heat of the drink mingles with the quiet thrill of shared space. A loaned cloak or scarf is not just a practical gift. It's a token that will carry their scent, a reminder of their presence in the hours you're apart. There's a different kind of patience in this season. The pace slows, but not in the way of spring or summer, where each day feels like a build toward something more. Now it's about tending the ember rather than fanning a flame. You don't look for big changes. You keep the connection alive in small, steady ways. And yet sometimes the cold months give you a moment so sharp and clear it feels like a turning point. Perhaps you're both sent to check on something in the storage rooms, the flickering light of your torch throwing long shadows across the walls. For a brief moment, you're out of sight of everyone else. You pause to speak about some small thing, a missing tool, the state of the barrels, but your eyes meet and hold, and the silence that follows says far more than the words did. You both step back into the current of daily life without a word about it, but the moment sits between you afterward, warm as the fire and just as carefully tended. Winter also has a way of making you more aware of how fragile such connections can be. People leave for other households. Marriages are arranged. Illness can sweep through in the cold months, changing the shape of a household in a matter of weeks. You know, as you've always known, that nothing is promised. But that knowledge only makes the game you've built together feel more precious. On certain nights when the hall has grown quiet, and only a few embers glow in the hearth, you find yourself thinking back through the seasons. The tentative glances of last winter, the bright quickened exchanges of spring, the open-air dances of summer, the ripened closeness of autumn. And now here you are again in the hush of winter, the same game still alive but stronger, richer, and more familiar than before. You realize that what you've been building isn't just a flirtation that changes with the seasons. It's a language you've learned together, one that no one else speaks, one that needs no words to make its meaning clear. And as you lay down to sleep, hearing the wind at the shutters and the quiet creak of the timbers settling in the cold, you feel a steady certainty. Whatever the next season brings you will carry this unspoken language with you. And in the morning, when the first pale light slips into the hall, you will know how to find them in the crowd, how to exchange the smallest of glances that means everything. Midwinter settles in with its deep, unhurried weight. The days are short enough that it feels as though the sun barely has time to rise before it begins to sink again. Outside, the world is locked under frost, the fields white and still, the trees standing bare against a sky that seems to rest low on the horizon. Inside, life contracts to the quiet glow of the hearth, the familiar murmur of voices, the smell of smoke and stew and baking bread. In this season, flirtation takes on its most delicate form. You no longer have the freedom of the fields or the cover of bustling festivals. Instead, you work in the constant, watchful nearness of others. Every word and glance must be measured, every movement shaped by the awareness that someone is always close enough to notice. Yet this closeness is not a hindrance. It is the very thing that gives the game its texture now, the constant awareness of their presence in a space you both inhabit, the way your days loop and weave around each other in patterns too consistent to be accidental. Tasks are smaller now, but they are done together more often. The kind of work that fills long winter afternoons, carding wool, mending torn seams, oiling leather-shelling nuts, drying herbs by the fire. The pace is slow and the room is warm with both heat and familiarity. You sit near enough that you can hear the shift of their weight, the faint scrape of their work, the quiet rhythm of their breathing. Small gestures carry more weight here than in any other season. A shared glance across the table while the rest of the room is distracted by a story. A brush of fingers as you pass a cup or tool. The momentary leaning in to hear them more clearly over the hum of the room. Even the offer of help, holding a skein of yarn taut, while they wind it into a ball, becomes a scene worth tucking away in memory. The long evenings invite more conversation, but not all of it can be shared openly. Instead, you build your own thread of private meaning out of ordinary words. You might comment on the weather in a way that carries a hidden reassurance. You might joke lightly a line that would seem meaningless to others, but that makes them smile because they understand the shared reference. Sometimes the closeness of winter offers a rare stroke of luck, a task that takes the two of you to a quieter part of the household. Perhaps you're sent to fetch something from a storeroom, or to check the latches on a shutter. The walk there is short, but it's enough. In that small pocket of privacy, your voices can drop, your eyes can meet without the constant awareness of a dozen others. The conversation might stay perfectly innocent, but the nearness is a gift in itself. Midwinter feasts punctuate the stillness with bursts of life. The hall fills with light and noise and color. Evergreen branches hung along the walls, candles set in every niche, tables piled with roasted meats, sweet pies, spiced ale. Guests arrive from neighboring manors, bringing news and stories, adding to the hum of the night. Music plays and dancing follows the same formal steps as before, but under the cloak of celebration, the glances and touches feel freer, easier. Perhaps you find yourselves partnered for a dance, the measured steps drawing you together, and apart your hands meeting again and again in the pattern. Or you might pass each other in the crowded room, exchanging a word as you move on. In the laughter and bustle of a feast, a shared moment can hide in plain sight. Yet there is still caution here. The very gatherings that give you space to be near each other also bring more eyes into the room. Guests can notice things a household has learned to overlook. You keep your glances short, your touches fleeting, your conversation light. And yet somehow you leave the night feeling as though you've spoken volumes. The heart of the season is in its quiet, steady days, days when the game becomes almost second nature. You find them without seeking. Speak without planning, share without thinking about the risk. It's as if the thread between you has grown so strong that it no longer needs deliberate tending. It simply exists, running from your hand to theirs, no matter how far apart you are in the room. But even in this steady rhythm, there are moments that catch you off guard. Perhaps you wake one morning to find that snow has fallen heavily in the night, blanketing the courtyard and muffling every sound. The air outside is so still that you can hear the creak of the snow under your boots. When you step out to help clear the paths, you see them there bundled against the cold, a dusting of snow caught in their hair. You exchange a look, nothing more, but it lodges in your chest and stays there all day. Or maybe you share an unexpected laugh, the kind that slips past your guard. Someone says something absurd at the table, and you both look at each other at the same time, seeing the same humor in it. The laugh comes before you can stop it, and for a moment you forget the careful boundaries. It's not until later, when you're alone with your thoughts, that you realize how much you cherish that moment of forgetting. As the days begin their slow turn toward lengthening again, you feel the first stirrings of change in the air. Not enough to shift the game yet, but enough to remind you that this season, like all the others, will pass. You've seen a full turn of the year together now, and you know how the game will adapt as the days stretch and the work moves outdoors again. But here in the heart of winter, you're content to let it stay as it is for a little while longer. When the hall grows quiet at night, the fire burned down to glowing coals, you can almost hear the thread between you hum in the stillness. You lie in your bed, listening to the faint hiss of the wind at the shutters, and you think about the year that's been, how a glance grew into a language, how that language has carried you through the seasons. And you know with a kind of quiet certainty that when morning comes, you'll find them in the room, and the game will begin again, without either of you needing to say a word. The days lengthen again, though at first it's only a whisper of change. A little more light lingers in the hall after supper, a touch more warmth in the air when you step outside in the early morning. The snow, once crisp and defiant, begins to sag under its own weight, edges softening into slush. You can smell the thaw before you can see it, damp earth, wet wood, and something green just beneath the surface waiting to push through. This is the quiet hinge between seasons, and your game tilts with it. The closeness of winter remains the careful brushes of fingers, the shared glances across a crowded room, but now there's the added sense of something about to open again. People talk more about the work to come, clearing fields, repairing tools, planting seed. And with those plans comes the promise of more open air, more time beyond the reach of constant watchfulness. In this in-between time, tasks begin to spill outdoors again. You might carry firewood from the dwindling winter pile, both of you stepping over icy patches in the yard. Or you might help clear snow from paths, working side by side in the pale sunshine. The work is practical necessary, but it also offers small moments of privacy the winter hall could never give. A shared laugh when the snow slides off a branch onto your shoulders. A hand offered to steady them over a patch of ice, fingers lingering a fraction longer than the excuse requires. There's a softness to these moments, a sense that you're easing out of the tight restraint winter demanded. It's not the bright eagerness of spring yet, but it's the prelude, a loosening of the knots you've kept tied so carefully. Evenings are still spent indoors, but the air feels lighter, the conversation a little more free. The small festivals of late winter arrive to mark the turn towards spring celebrations of saints of the coming planting, of the days growing longer. These aren't the grand fairs of summer, but they carry their own charm. In the hall, there's music, sometimes clumsy but heartfelt, and the measured steps of familiar dances. You take their hand in the pattern, feeling the warmth beneath the winter chill, and in that contact is the whole promise of the months to come. In the kitchens, preparations for these feasts are bustling affairs. You might find yourselves working close over a table of dough or spices, trading quick words while others clatter around you. The scent of cinnamon or nutmeg hangs in the air, and the heat from the ovens draws a flush to everyone's cheeks. In such moments, you can speak a little more freely, the noise and movement around you, providing cover for remarks that might have drawn notice in the stillness of a deep winter evening. And then there are the walks. The paths are still muddy and wet, but they're walkable again, and errands beyond the courtyard become part of the rhythm once more. Perhaps you're sent together to check on a fence line or to fetch something from a neighboring holding. These walks aren't hurried. The thaw is slow, and so are your steps. You fall into a quiet conversation about nothing in particular. The behavior of a stubborn mule, a memory of last summer's market. But the simple fact of walking together in the open again feels like a gift. The thaw also loosens the boundaries in small, almost invisible ways. It's easier to be near each other in the yard without drawing the same kind of notice that winter's close quarters brought. It's easier to pause a moment longer when handing over a tool to let your glance hold just a heartbeat more before moving on. These are tiny freedoms, but you feel them like the first shoots of green pushing through frost. One afternoon, you find yourselves outside with no one else in sight. The snow melt drips from the eaves in a steady rhythm, the ground beneath your boots, soft and giving. You speak of something practical, the state of the thatch, the repairs needed on a wall, but the way you stand, the way your bodies angle toward each other, says something else entirely. You don't reach for them, don't need to. The air between you carries enough to make your chest tighten. Even with these new liberties, the rules of the game remain. You don't push too far, too fast. You know that spring will bring more opportunities, more excuses to be out of sight. But it's the slow return of those chances that keeps the anticipation alive. The pleasure of this season lies in the promise, not yet in the full bloom. And still, there are moments when the months behind you rise to the surface in a single look. You'll be in the middle of work, sweeping rushes from the hall, hauling wood sorting seed, and you'll glance up to see them watching you. Not openly, not boldly, but in that same private way you've shared since the beginning. It's a reminder that no matter how the seasons turn, the thread between you has never slackened. As the days grow longer, you notice the light change again. It's clearer now, less diffused by winter haze. Colors return to the world, the dark, wet brown of the earth, the pale green of moss, the deep blue of a sky washed clean by rain. You begin to imagine the fairs and festivals ahead, the dances under open skies, the walks through fields filled with growing things. One evening, after a day of clearing debris from the yard, you find yourselves side by side at the edge of the courtyard, looking out toward the horizon. The sun is setting, washing the sky in a muted blaze of rose and gold. The air is still cold enough that your breath clouds faintly, but you stand there for a long moment without speaking. In the quiet, your shoulders brush just once, just enough to make you aware of every inch of space between you. When you part for the night, it's with the easy familiarity of two people who have walked through a full year together, season by season. You've learned the shape of each other's silences, the tilt of a glance, the meaning of a pause, and as you head to your separate beds, you know that soon the year will turn again to the bright openness of spring, and with it, the next stage of your slow, careful, beautiful game. For now, though, you let yourself rest in the warmth of this in-between, the season of melting snow, lengthening days, and the promise of more to come. You've been here before, and you'll be here again, but this time the history you share gives every step forward a deeper, quieter weight. And as you close your eyes that night, you carry with you not just the promise of the season ahead, but the knowledge of how far you've already come. Spring returns, not with a sudden burst, but like a shy guest lingering in the doorway before stepping fully inside. The mornings grow gentler, the frost fading earlier each day, until one morning you realize you haven't seen ice for a week. Birds return in earnest now, filling the air with calls that weave into the rhythm of the day. The earth softens underfoot, smelling of rain and new growth. You can feel it in yourself too, the sense that the world is opening again. With spring comes movement, and with movement, opportunity. The fields call for attention. The market square stirs to life, and errands stretch farther from the safety of walls. You see them more often in the open air, again their hair caught by the wind, the sun drawing out the color in their face. You're not limited to stolen glances in crowded rooms anymore. You can walk beside them, speak without lowering your voice quite so much, linger just a little longer at the end of a conversation. There's work to be done everywhere, and it pulls you together in new ways. You might be sent to clear debris from the edges of a field, your boots sinking into soft earth as you work side by side. Or perhaps you help mend a fence together, the shared weight of tools and wood, a rhythm that needs no words. In the space between tasks, you pause for water, standing close in the gentle sun. It's all entirely innocent to anyone who might see, but for you, the contact of standing shoulder to shoulder feels like the heartbeat of the day. The festivals return small at first, a saint's day here, a planting feast there. But even these are rich in the texture of your game. You might join hands for a circle dance, the steps drawing you near the music, setting your feet in time. You might share a sweetmeat from a tray, pretending to weigh its flavor, while your real attention is on the way their eyes linger on yours. The warmth of the air makes everything easier, smiles, laughter, the occasional teasing remark that would have felt too bold in the hush of winter. By now, you've walked this path together for a full year. The hesitance of those first glances has deepened into something more grounded, something that lives comfortably in the spaces you share. You know how to find each other in a room without looking, how to read the meaning in a half smile or a raised brow. You've learned the map of this unspoken world, and it belongs to you both alone. Sometimes that awareness makes the smallest moments feel luminous. You might be helping stack firewood in the shed when they step past you, close enough for your sleeves to brush. Or you might be kneeling in the garden, pulling early weeds when their shadow falls across you, and you look up into a gaze you know better than any words. These moments don't demand anything. They simply are clear, bright markers on the long road you've traveled. The larger fairs arrive as spring deepens, drawing people from miles around. The market stalls are alive with color bolts of dyed cloth baskets piled high with early fruit ribbons fluttering in the breeze. Musicians play in the open air, their tunes threading between the shouts of vendors and the laughter of children. You wander the market together under the safe cover of the crowd, stopping to admire a piece of carved wood or the bright gleam of a polished brooch. It's in these moments that the year's worth of quiet building shows its strength. You don't need to force the game anymore. It runs like a river under every exchange. When you hand them a coin to buy something small, your fingers meet in a way that feels both casual and deliberate. When you walk away from a stall, you fall into step without thinking, your pace matching theirs naturally. And then there are the dances. Outdoors, now on the green, the music lighter, the steps quicker. You take their hand, feeling the familiar warmth in your palm, and spin them into the rhythm of the day. The sun is on your face, the grass under your feet, the sound of their laughter in your ears. If anyone sees the way your hand lingers in theirs between steps, they'll think it's just the music keeping you there. By evening, the fair has wound down to pockets of song and the smell of roasting meat. You might walk them back toward the edge of the green, where the crowd thins and the noise softens. The lantern light catches in their hair, and for a moment, you're both standing in the gentle glow, neither in a hurry to step away. Words feel unnecessary. The air between you carries enough. In this season, the risk of your game fades a little, not because people wouldn't notice if they looked, but because the life of the village, the planting, the trading, the celebrating, keeps everyone's attention moving. You have more room to breathe, more chances to simply be in each other's company without needing to justify it. That ease is its own kind of sweetness, a reward for the patience you've both shown. And yet the truth of this medieval kind of love play is that it is always on the edge of something. It thrives in the maybe, the almost, the not yet. A full confession would break the shape of the game, and so you hold it lightly, letting it stretch forward in time. You don't need to name it. You already know what it is. When you look back on the year, you can trace it like a story told in seasons, the cautious beginnings of winter, the quickening of spring, the freedom of summer, the deepening in autumn, and the closeness of the second winter. And now here you are again, in the bright openness of spring, the story continuing, not because you've reached its end, but because this is the kind of tale that doesn't need an ending. One afternoon, you meet on a path between fields, each of you coming from different work. You stop for a moment, leaning on the handles of the tools you're carrying. You talk about nothing important, the stubborn weather, the market that's coming up, but the sun is warm, and the way you're standing, the easy comfort between you tells the real story. A year ago, this would have felt like something fragile, in danger of breaking if you held it too tightly. Now it feels steady, like a cord braided from 100 quiet threads. When evening falls, you part with the same kind of smile you've given each other 100 times, before, the kind that holds more than it shows. And as you walk away, you're not thinking about how the game began or when it might end. You're simply living in it step by step, season by season, as natural now as the turning of the year itself. The year has turned full circle, and you've walked every step of it with this quiet, unspoken thread running between you. Now, as the evening deepens, the world feels softer, slower. The last light of day fades into the kind of twilight that smooths all edges, the stones of the courtyard, the lines of the fields, even the fine distinctions between memory and present moment. You let your thoughts wander, moving lazily over the seasons you've seen. Winter's first careful glances, spring's quickening pace, summer's open laughter, autumn's ripened closeness, and back again to winter's quiet patience. Each season brought its own kind of nearness, its own way of speaking without words. It was never hurried, never demanded more than the moment could give, and perhaps that's why it lasted. In this drowsy quiet, you imagine the hall settling for the night. The fire burns low, casting a warm glow that flickers across the beams. Somewhere a door closes softly. Boots scuff lightly against the floor before falling silent. The day exhales and the hush of evening deepens. You picture them now in their own corner of the night. Maybe they're sitting by a candle, lost in their own thoughts. Maybe they're already asleep, the rhythm of their breath slow and steady. Wherever they are, the thread between you still hums, faint but unbroken, a promise that the story will pick up again tomorrow without need for grand beginnings or formal endings. So you let your eyes close. The year will turn again. The glances will return, the moments will keep building, and the quiet, careful dance will go on. For now, there's only the warm drift of sleep, the comfort of a story still in motion, and the slow, steady rhythm of your own breath.